you talk about the history of this moment, to be live with you two in one box, seeing in the other box the former president after being, convicted of 34 counts. I mean, wow, what an evening this has been.
Evening it's been for the country, and not only the country, also for New York City. Remember, those 12 jurors, those 7 men, those 5 women, they are regular, everyday New Yorkers just like us, and they have now convicted a president, something that has never happened before. I just want to set the stage real quick here. We can't turn the camera around. We're kind of penned in, literally, shoulder to shoulder. Stunned silence from the Trump camp that was so vocal earlier. A little further down in Foley
some of them
Square,
did peel off in that direction.
A little bit of noise. And why is that?
We think that's because they are approximating, though they may not be quite accurate. That is where Alvin Bragg is set to speak in about a half hour. So you're seeing American flags, Trump supporting flags, red hats and the like over there, sort of chanting. We can't quite make out what they're saying, but police sort of rushed in that direction to try and get control of the situation.
What do you imagine Alvin Bragg saying? He took a big gamble. A lot of people said this. We just heard Mr. Peckman tell us that this really was probably the weakest of all the cases, and it was won. He must feel very gratified. He must feel very satisfied. Does he come out and keep it dignified?
I would say so. I mean, he's tried to convey this keep it a 10,000-foot mentality throughout this entire process. He really wasn't even in court for many of the days, and anytime he was in there, we were watching very intently to see what he would do, and the short answer was he went there, he sat down, he remained quiet, he let his ADAs do the work, and then he left almost immediately. He never even looked at former President Trump. So the mentality he's tried to maintain about this has been one of, I am the chief law enforcement officer of this county. That's exactly what I'm going to do. No better, no worse.
Sticking with that, if you're President Biden, and I know he's put out a tweet, how do you handle it right now? Of course, hey, he lost, and if you're in the Biden camp, I presume you have to act presidential as well.
What I would say is the calculation for President Biden is arguably more difficult than the calculation right now for former President Trump. Let me explain. I mean, you have the former president, we've already heard him speak, come out and say much of what he said throughout this entire trial. It's the politics of grievance that he is essentially running on in this election year. Current President Biden really has yet to try and find a message in how to address these criminal trials and troubles that former President Trump has that seem to float him up in the polls, and make his supporters, donate to him and really galvanize his base. So you might see a bit of a recalculation going on. Essentially, the statement you're referring to is President Biden said no one is above the law in New York. That's about as far into the case he went, and he said, but there's one way to keep former President Trump out of the Oval Office, and that is at the ballot box. So he's really saying this is about the election. Let's focus on that. It's definitely a recalibration from a couple of days ago when he sent Robert De Niro down here close to where we're standing, and it was a bit of a circus, and most of the Democratic commentators said, what are you guys doing? This is not how you handle this situation.
Right. All right, let's talk about what you talk about, political ramifications. Had Donald Trump walked out of here free man acquitted, it would have been a huge political windfall for him. He could say this was a persecution, not a prosecution. He could say this is a witch hunt. All the other trials against me that I still haven't had yet, they are witch hunts too. That's not the case. He's walking out here convicted felon right now. So, comment.
Yeah, well, his son, Donald Trump Jr., actually put out a quote not long ago that said, you're really going to sentence him 4 days before the convention? Well, we just heard from Anthony, this is exactly what the Trump defense team inside the courtroom had asked for.
Yeah.
And talk about this case unfolding, as we get closer to the election. Well, the delay tactic was one of former President Trump's defense team. So it really is this, very thinly veiled irony where you have them pushing for delays, pushing for various changes, and then saying, well, this is just unacceptable and you're out to get me. It doesn't pass a smell test, John. It just doesn't.
There's a long time till November, but the polls, the most recent polls, Republicans, 1 in 4 saying if former President Trump is convicted of a felony, I won't be able to vote for him. 60% of independents in a recent poll saying that they're on the fence, but if former President Trump is convicted, they won't be able to vote for him. Do you expect that those numbers will hold? Do you expect that they'll evolve? What do you make of it?
I think they will evolve. I think by all accounts we're looking at a very close presidential election. And we discussed this a little bit before. When you ask that question, I think most people go to some notion that the former president interfered in the 2020 election or encouraged his supporters to attack the Capitol. And without getting into politics or opinion about all of that, I really do think when you think about the criminal troubles of former President Trump, you think about those more serious issues, not a hush money payment that was reimbursed to his former lawyer for, sleeping with a porn star, as is alleged, as former President Trump denies. So I'm really curious, what the polling looks like in the next couple of days when the pollsters begin asking, okay, he was convicted of falsifying business records. Does it change anything? How many of those people that said they'd rethink say, no, I said a felony, not falsifying business records? It's one and the same, but how many voters truly understand that?
For viewers at home who are watching the motorcade go up to Trump Tower and going, well, wait a minute. He's just been convicted of 34 felony counts, and he's driving home.
Yeah.
Break that down a little bit. He's released on his own recognizance from the original bail. Is that correct?
Yeah, so let's say there was a criminal defendant. For the sake of not being biased, let's say it's me. I was charged with this offense. I was found guilty. I was released on my own recognizance in the pre-trial phase. I would be going home. I wouldn't be going home in a limo with high security. There wouldn't be all these police officers standing here. There wouldn't be protesters. But the simple act of me going home is equivalent to him going home right now. For all the things that raise eyebrows on this very historic day, that's not necessarily one of them.
And he will stay free on the campaign trail and free to say what he wants. No more gag orders.
Yeah, the same conditions.
Until
he
July
can
11th,
travel,
until we see what happens
he can be on the
then.
campaign trail tomorrow. Yes, exactly. The gag order being lifted effectively now by the trial ending is something that becomes very interesting. And we may see some more poignant comments at Michael Cohen. Forgot to mention, Cohen actually tweeted something substantial. He really just said, justice is served, the truth has come out, and he thanked his attorneys. Nothing super jarring. He tends to save his most colorful comments for his podcast, some of which we heard in the courtroom.
Now, the trial is over, but Judge Marchant, who was front and center, a very pivotal figure, of course, in this trial, he's not done.
No.
He's going to really
be... His most important role is
arguably
in charge
right
now. Yeah.
Of the sentencing, and he has wide leeway. This is New York court. This is not federal court where the guidelines are much stricter. He has giant leeway here. We talked about this a little bit earlier. He said when the whole gag order controversy was flaring up and the contempt of court threat that he would hold President Trump in contempt of court, he said, I don't want to do this. I understand the gravitas of putting a former president in jail. Now he's going to be in charge, but he also added, by the way, I will do it if I have to. Now he's going to be in charge of the sentencing, and really, we could have 100 some odd years if they were consecutive. You have probably more like
gets
4 to less
concurrently, 4 and less.
4 years maximum and less. And you could have 0 time, you could have probation, you could have a symbolic few weeks behind bars, you could have home confinement. Do you think Judge Marchant's reluctance to put him behind bars during the trial for violating gag orders might foretell leniency in the sentencing phase?
What I will say about that is I view that as a very separate situation. Where I do think Justice Marchant will go with this is any precedent he can find for these falsifying business record charges. Set aside the fact that this is a historic felony conviction of a former president. When was the last Joe business person that was convicted in New York of falsifying business records? Probably some point earlier this year or last year, and the case record will be available. He's very big on precedent and process. We really saw that on full display when he read the instructions for the jury. What you didn't hear, and what kind of got lost in all the wrangling of him reading an hour's worth of instructions, is that a lot of that was very pro forma, and he was big on, boilerplate language. So if he can tell there's any sort of a pattern that emerges in sentencing for this type of crime in the state of New York, I wouldn't, and I don't have the answer to that right now, and I think it's worth researching. I would certainly say that's probably the direction he goes.
I'm looking down at our computer because I didn't even realize we had it here, and we're looking at that motorcade working its way towards Trump Tower. What is the team going to do tonight when they get upstairs to that apartment?
I think they probably confer on the appeal that starts immediately, and that brings another interesting point. Are you looking at a sentencing that gets deferred either by the Appeals Court of New York, that's the highest court we have in New York, think of it like the Supreme Court, except all our county courts are called Supreme Courts, a little bit backwards here, but the Court of Appeals in New York, do they put a stay on any sentencing until they can weigh in on his appeal, and how long does that take? Does Justice Marchand, realizing that the appeals process is taking place, do anything, to delay his own process?
All right, we want to thank.
So many fascinating nuances here. We're reporting live in front of the criminal courthouse. Henry Rosoff, John Muller. Guys, back to you.
All right, thank